The power of positivity is real.
This podcast is brought to you by ArcMed, fast and focused design and manufacturing.
I'm Greg Maurer, founder and owner of Archimed.
And I'm Caroline Squatrigo, talent engagement specialist. We are on a journey to grow, learn, and gain expertise in small to mid-size company culture. Join us.
All right, Caroline, today we are going to dive into another book review. And this time we'll be discussing The Happiness Advantage, the 7 principles that fuel success and performance at work, authored by Shawn Achor. And this was another recommendation of our CEO, Jon. He always has a lot of good book recommendations. He's a continual learner. And when he finds a good one, he shares it with the team. And he recommended that the two of us read this book, and now we're ready to dive in and discuss it.
There's a lot of interesting stuff to this, but Jon, what was your reasoning for recommending this? What really stuck with you about it?
Well, in my career in being in manufacturing for over 25 years, um, the manufacturing environment has a tendency to always start with the negative, or always start with the position of covering up your mistakes, covering up, or making sure you're not going to be blamed for something. And negativity, when it comes through in a culture or in a mindset, it leads to people not being productive. And I wanted to know, as a leader, how I could change that narrative, and that's what led me to reading this book.
I was struck by the title, and I sort of think it might be a little misleading because it's really more, it's way more than just happiness. But, we talked about what should our metric be, or what should we be going for, and we settled around fulfillment because happiness is so highly subjective. And the book does say, in fact, that happiness is highly subjective, doesn't really shy away from that. But despite that, what I really liked about it was sort of the discussion of positive psychology. In other words, when we talked about what we should be measuring, we talked about fulfillment as a measure of success. But what this book does is turns it around and says happiness is the driver of success, not the measurement of it. It's not a result of what you do. It produces the result. And that positive psychology, like when you were a kid and your parents said, have a good attitude, think positively, that's actually works.
Yeah, I'm sure people see on social media there's a lot of influencers who talk about like visualizing your best self, and like all you have to do is visualize it. And I think they might be a little bit off, but I did find it interesting because I mean there is science behind this. They've done a lot of studies, and where your head's at when you're going into something does have a big impact on your performance. So I think it's a very personal thing. But the great thing about this is it can radiate, right? So it talks about, if you're positive, if you're going into every day positively, and you can train your brain to focus on those things, that is going to that's going to radiate around you. People are going to pick up on that, and then people are going to subconsciously notice it. And the idea being it spreads, which I think when we're looking at it from a business perspective, if we could get every leader in the building to be positive, like what could that do for us? What could that do to every department?
Well, I guess to quote the book, that would create a lot of butterflies, right? Because it talks about that analogy where the wings of a butterfly can generate a hurricane on the other side of the world. And the thought process of that, and as you put it, um, it's amazing how much positivity can generate that level of um, increased performance, right? When people feel happy, they perform. Um, I'm sure all of us can relate to the fact that if we have something outside of work that is bothering us, or some sort of influence that is bothering us that may not be work related, if we come in with that, we're not productive, or not as productive as we could be that given day, because we still have something looming that needs to be taken care of. Um, it talks of, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say that's a really interesting point. I want to let's spend a minute there. So we talk about being human at work, right? And bringing your full self and not compartmentalizing. I can never say that word. What happens outside of work with work, and then but now we're talking about sort of controlling. If we got in a fight with our spouse, or got in a fender bender on the way to work, and you sort of stroll around and no one knows what happened, and you're just radiating negativity. So I guess it sounds like a balance between controlling and compartmentalizing the negativity versus also being human at work. How do you look at that, John?
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and it gets back to what Caroline just said, which is, what if leaders acted that way? And for me, it's whenever you walk up to someone and you may see that distress on their face, or you may say, "Hey, I feel like something's bothering you," and they share that with you, it's our duty to talk through that with them. It's We have to value that they're carrying that burden, and with that burden, it is going to affect them, right? It's going to affect their performance, because that's human nature. But we can't walk away and ignore it, because if we do, it will continue to exist. So how do we become that shoulder to cry on, or that person to lean on, or even someone that can offer help in some way, to give them comfort that it's going to be okay? And um, and how do we find that silver lining through that adversity, or just to say, hey, I know you're capable of handling this, and although it's not something you wanted to happen, there's no doubt you will figure out how to work through it. Sometimes people just need to hear that.
I think too, they talk about in the book, like training yourself to look at events positively. So I think one example they use is if you're in a bank that gets robbed and you get shot in the arm, are you gonna look at that and say, "I'm so unlucky because I got shot," or are you gonna say, "Thank God I didn't get shot in the head"? Kind of extreme. I think I'd be a little upset that I got shot in the arm, but you could still be like, "I survived that." You gotta train yourself to think that way.
I feel like out of the gate, you should at least be allowed a minute or two about, man, this sucks. My arm's killing me, before going to positivity.
Maybe a minute. Maybe a minute.
But so, John, you talked about what to do when others are bringing negative emotions as leaders. But what about the leader? Are you not allowed to put your head down every once in a while walking down the hall because of you're trying to figure out your kid's MRI or whatever that's on your mind? Do you have that luxury?
I think you have the luxury. Um, it's one of I always look at it as though, um, it, Caroline brings up a really good point, which is, you didn't break your leg, you tweaked your knee, right? I mean, uh, and it's one of those where, what is the optimistic approach that you take to making sure that you're sharing in a way where it is, people could value your concern, but also looking at it as though there's a lot of people out there going through a lot of worse things, right? And being grateful. And it talks a lot about being grateful and showing gratitude in this book. And a lot of time it's just that perspective. And Greg, like the point you just brought up, it's, is it really, yeah, you're going to take a minute and go, I got shot in the arm, and that sucks. Uh, but you're also then going to going to flip that and go, that could have ended up a lot worse. And I'm glad it didn't end up worse in some way.
I was thinking about a friend of mine who recently passed away, and he's 52 years old, and it was just awful. And he died of cancer, and he fought it for 3 years. And it just popped into my head how he was the most positive person. His attitude was just exudes positivity. His smile, and that's what hurt so much about his loss, because it's especially painful for the world when they lose that kind of positivity.
Mhm.
But he had the opportunity for closure and to say goodbye and to have special moments. I got another friend of mine whose husband just dropped dead from a massive aneurysm. No opportunity. So both deaths are tragic, but one had that sort of silver lining, I guess. It's still I think really quite a challenge to put happy thoughts in your mind when you're dealing with tragedy.
It is. Uh, recently here at Archimed, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary, and we highlighted some folks that exemplify our culture, our values, um, stay customer focused, and I got some feedback from one of the folks we recognized, where an outside influence had made her feel as though she wasn't doing a good job. She wasn't adequate. And it had nothing to do with us, but had and it actually took that happiness or that fulfillment away from her. But because we recognized her unknowingly, it completely flipped her script again to that optimism and, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be. And it's amazing how that piece of recognition recentered that person that quickly.
Yeah, and I think, that individual, she does so much for us, and it really is a shame that, like, one person made her feel that way,
Yeah.
but, I mean, it does demonstrate, I mean, negativity, it's the same thing as positivity. It grows and it spreads, and it can just make you feel terrible, and I think to John's point, I mean, that's all we can do to combat it is take care of our people and try to spread the positivity when we know they deserve that. Um the other thing I liked in here, and I was talking to John about this, you guys know I'm a huge control freak. And so I like that a lot of what is discussed in the book is all about, you have control over this. I don't think they mean to make it sound easy, but um, you have control over your mindset, and it does say people who feel like they have control over their own outcomes tend to get more positive outcomes. And they use the example of an athlete. If an athlete doesn't win or an athlete fails at something, they don't look at the ref and say, "Oh, that was a bad call," or they don't say my equipment was malfunctioning. They go back and they grind and they train and they perform so they do better. Um, and it's almost a comforting thought to me, because I'm like, okay, nobody can get to me but me. And it's like you have to keep telling yourself that, like, I am the one who can decide how I react to things and how I push through things and how I perform.
Yeah, and I think that summary and what Greg mentioned too. It's the book talks about turning negative momentum into positive momentum. Greg talks about death. He talked about tragedy. He talked about when a call goes wrong in a game, or something goes wrong to a plan that we've had. And it talks a lot about how after crisis or adversity, your mind follows one of three paths, right? The negative event produces no change, and you end up where you started, which is you stay in that whirlwind of negativity. Further negative consequences, you end up worse after the event. This is why we get afraid of conflict, challenges that happen in our life. Or the third path is you use adversity and failure to become even stronger and more capable than you were before. And there's so many success stories of how people have gone through tragedy, but then become even better versions of themselves. But it takes bullet number 3 in order to do that. But there's a lot of woe is me. There's a lot of, oh, I'm just surrounded by bad luck. But how do you take that adversity? And if you're not surrounded by people that can build you up, and they're not optimistic, and they're not there to support you, it's easy for that negativity to take over, and happiness then becomes very hard to achieve. And I think the book said that very well, and it talks about how people are not defined by events that happen to them, but rather what they're able to produce from those events. And that's I think we're talking through all of those examples uh, through our discussion today.
I think it makes me think of the book Mindset. It talked about growth mindset and fixed mindset, and I think they're really tied together. Uh, the two books are one part of a larger story, each one part of a larger story. It'd be hard to contextualize uh, negativity and to start to think about happy thoughts, to cut negativity out of your life, uh, to not stress about things outside of your control, all the things this book tells us to do. If you have a fixed mindset, you need a growth mindset to be able to do those things. And I think they're sort of married together now that I think about it. And I love both books, and I think they're really taken together is sort of the full package.
I agree. And another thing that's shared in those books, and that mindset is take control of what you can control. Right? If you can't control that your dad or your brother or your spouse got cancer. You can't control that. But what you can control is what you have to do from there. And that's hard. And Greg, again, you can call it a growth mindset, you can call it an optimistic mindset, you could, but without that, if you just become fixated on what is and not what can be, um, it can become a lonely, dark place. That's just a reality. And when you have people in your organization that struggle with that, um, the best we can do is help them get out of there, and in any way that we can support it.
Yeah, it makes me think of we've talked about the impact of like a good leader and also the impact of a bad one. And we have seen that turnaround. We have had some people in the building who are just negative, and we picked up on it and we look around and we see an entire team struggling with just coming in, feeling terrible, everything's not going right, the entire company's against them. They're in that mindset, and then you take out the one negative person and like literally overnight everything will shift. And as much as it's terrible that they had to go through that negativity, I love seeing that shift because it is a testament to like how these things can grow and can migrate and spread. It's like it's almost like a disease, but obviously we prefer to have the positivity going around.
Yeah, it's like a yawn, right?
It is like
They're
a
both
yawn.
contagious.
Yeah. Uh, the one thing that I found to be very challenging, and I think that organizationally it could be a stretch, is training your brain to look for the positive over the negative, right? I think just in society, human nature is to be cliche, to start with the glass half full rather than, or half empty rather than half full. Whether it's in reading an email or receiving feedback or whatever that may be, training your brain to look for the positive uh, can be extremely difficult. I guess I'd ask the two of you, when you think about that or situations, how do you do that, or how might you implement something like that when you're training your brain to look?
So that's a good question, John. And I have two sort of A and B responses to it. A, I think I'm naturally wired to be an optimizer. And so even when things are going well, I'm trying to figure out how can I maximize the potential of whatever I'm working on and whatever relationship I'm in or whatever I'm doing. And so I think that's a big component of it. It helps to be naturally wired that way. But the other thing is something my dad always told me. He said, always look for the opportunity, even when things aren't going well. So if somebody quits and you're somebody you really liked and relied on and was an integral part, instead of saying, "Oh God, you know, it's so horrible," or you call up your partner and say, "Are you ready for this? You're not ready for this. Sit down." Instead, you say, "There's an opportunity ahead. We now have an opportunity to go get some new blood and put it in this position and refresh it and reinvigorate it. And there's great people out there, and let's go find someone awesome." So I always think about what opportunity exists, even when things nominally are not going well. There's always opportunity.
That's a great way to look at things. I know for me, um, I would say this has been a journey for me because, and I think the biggest slap in the face for me was more in the parenting realm than it was in the business world. And and I just remember in dealing with uh, my son, and he had just started high school, and he's developing into a young man, and I think about the way that I was parented, so I mimicked a lot of the way I was parented, and then it just was like I would see him shut down anytime I was on him about something or negative about a grade or action or whatever it was. But what I found is if I reinforced the positive behavior, he became invigorated and like did exactly what I needed him to do, and just it, it completely flipped the script of how I parented and improved our relationship as father and son. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. And one of the things that I've tried to do and have even made a conscious effort to do more of since reading this book is to write people notes of what I see that are positive behaviors. And I walk around the office and I see that people have them like on their desk or next to their monitor or like taped to the wall. And I'm like, oh, and it means something. And it's those little things that if you are conscious about training your brain to do the positive or concentrate on the positive, the impact is it's immediate, and that's what's been gratifying to me after reading this book.
Yeah, and so that leads me to the next question. How do we train our leaders on these techniques? I guess we give them the book. That would be step one. But is there a session ahead for at the All Associates about here are the top 5 techniques to have a positive mindset? You could say, number 1, putting your negative emotions into words diminishes their power. Number 2, you could say, think happy thoughts. Number 3, thank people, exhibit gratitude. All the stuff we just talked about that's in the book. Maybe that would be something we'd want to extend, as broadly as possible, so that we can accomplish what Caroline sort of laid out as an ideal. Imagine if all the employees walked around with a positivity kind of outlook.
So, no, we've talked a lot about like the importance of walking the walk, especially as a leadership team. So, I think the first step is, yeah, tell people about this, tell them this idea, make the book available for people. But the second thing would be demonstrating it and positively reinforcing it when we see it. I think that's the only way to help make this change happen. The other thing, it just occurred to me. I think it's important. The idea of positivity, at least in my mind, is not shying away from if there's a problem. Like I would never want everyone walking around the building just saying like everything's wonderful, everything's great. We don't have to change anything. because we have problems all the time. I mean, whether it's like operationally, if it's process based, if it's people based, I mean, there's an endless amount just like everywhere else. But I think it's more about approaching those things with a results or maybe a solution oriented mindset rather than just letting it get you down. Because I think keeping that piece of we still want to identify when we need to change something, but it's approaching that change in the positive light that will really make the difference.
I think that was perfectly said. Well, uh, John, is there anything else that from the book that you think we ought to cover for our listeners?
Didn't John Lennon sing a song about imagine all the people?
Yeah, yeah. If there was no discord in the world, if there was no negativity in the world.
Yeah, it brings me to like that being like the theme song of this book, if you will, right? Of what we're trying to create. And I think Caroline mentioned it in a recent leadership meeting. We talked about how do we focus on eliminating negativity because the impact of it just shuts so many people down from adding their view and challenging and feeling valued and all of that. So I think it's a challenge that's in front of us. I don't I don't have the exact answer of how do we train them, but I have no doubt we have to start to in some way.
Yeah, I agree with that. As my wife Megan always says to the kids and to me for that matter, you need to have an attitude of gratitude. Well, thanks, John, for coming on the podcast and for referencing this book is a must read. Caroline and I enjoyed reading it, and this is one of those books that has not just pie in the sky stuff, but really applicable tools, tangible things, accessible techniques to switch the gears from negativity to positivity. And it's a good business decision. It'll make you happier and it'll make you more successful. So thanks, John. Appreciate it. And I appreciate, as always, everything you do as the leader of Archimed.
Thank you both. It was a great time.
So I thought that was a good book to read, and it goes back to what we've been discussing for a while now about the right metric and happiness and fulfillment and all those kinds of things. And I was a little bit concerned when I read the title, The Happiness Advantage, because I've sort of landed, and I think you have too, on fulfillment, the pursuit of fulfillment versus the chasing down happiness, which is such a fleeting feeling.
Well, I think when we talked about fulfillment, we were coming at it from how can we as leaders and a company foster some whatever that metric like feeling or goal mentality is, and how can we support that? And I think we landed on fulfillment because it seemed like something that was a little bit more in our control, a little bit more measurable, and something that we could support in a better way. Whereas happiness is so individual, and it really depends on the person. It's, I might having a great cup of coffee in the morning might make my day, whereas somebody, maybe they have a great cup of coffee every morning, and they need something a little bit bigger to make their day, right? And so happiness is a little bit more subjective.
Yeah, after I read this, I thought, okay, this is not about what we can do as an organization.
Right.
This is about what an individual can do to achieve that happiness advantage, which is a competitive edge that comes from feeling happy and having a positive attitude. Those things fuel performance. And so you asked, how do we get our leaders and our associates trained on these techniques? Because it's really going to be something that each individual would have to embrace.
Yeah, I mean, I think because of that, for one, if we could get everyone to read this book, I think that would be a good first step. But I loved there were so many tools in here, and there was a lot of like firm ways that you could train your brain to think positively and to seek out those happy moments and those good things about the day. One thing they talked about was, practice being practice writing good things down. It could be something really simple. It could be, here are the 3 good things that happened to me today.
and it sounds really cheesy, but that will just put your brain in the mindset of always looking for those good, happy things. And of course, the great outcome is when we're happy, we tend to perform better at our job, better in life. We tend to have these better outcomes. We feel like we have more control over what's happening to us. I think I mentioned it when we were talking to John. I am a control freak. I will admit that. So I loved that piece of it. I was like, "Oh, okay, I can this is something that I can control." So now I will do my best to embrace this.
I don't think you're a control freak. I'm going to go on record there. You may like control, you may uh, be more comfortable in that environment, but you have a growth mindset, and so you also embrace change that is required to grow. And that's a lot about what this book is. It to me it marries up with the book Mindset, and maybe a lot of times when we do these podcasts we learn a lot, and it's sort of it's internal growth, but it doesn't always produce an action item. Sometimes it does, like when we learned about the culture committee and other ways to do that, and sometimes it's just about learning. But I think there's an action item that the two of us can take from this, which is how do we train our leaders on the techniques to maximize the opportunity for happiness and marry that with the opportunities to pursue a growth versus a fixed mindset. If we could figure out, a training, we do all sorts of trainings, right? The ARC Academy is full of lessons. Maybe we put a couple lessons together on these techniques. What do you think?
I think it's definitely worth it. I think it would be one of those. It would be something quick. It wouldn't require a lot of time or monetary investment, and it could pay off so much in the long run. And then yeah, I think we make this book available to anybody who's interested, because I think reading it yourself, and like we said, this seems to be more of an individual approach. So I think it does take, we can push it as much as we want, but it does take people buying into it on their own as well.
Which leads me, and I'm a little off topic, but what if we created some sort of how they have those libraries? It's like a pole in the ground on random street corners, and people come in, and maybe we put one of those into the facility somewhere
Yeah,
as
like
the
those like
library.
take a book, leave a book things.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that
I'm
could be
in. I
fun.
think
All right,
think that would be a good one.
all right. This was fun.
In our next episode, we're going to actually start a new series. Our last one was our Father's Day series, and now we want to make this a thing. So our next series, we're going to talk about ownership structures and their impact on company culture. So we will be starting off with a publicly owned company. How does being publicly owned impact the culture? We will be joined by the founder and CEO of MS Communications, Jeff Smulian.